Cool. I think we're ready to go. All right, well, welcome to the session on work-life balance. My name is Ellen Sue. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Wellings, which is a wearable medical device company. I'm also a mentor in residence at Sci-City. So, part of why they wanted me to speak was because I've been able to juggle a bunch of roles at once. I'm not going to say that I'm the expert at work-life balance, but I've managed to stay sane, as well as learned a lot of tips through trial and error and kind of trial by fire of how to stay sane through running a startup company and also kind of balancing personal life, volunteering, all of that. So lots of things that I've learned from that, and hopefully some of that will be useful to you guys. And I'd love for this to be more of a conversation. So if you have specific questions or specific concerns or problems that you're having that are bringing you to this room today, I would love to hear about them and think about ways that, some of what I learned can be helpful to you, and also ways that, we can tailor some of this to be more useful to you in your life. The really big thing for me in terms of figuring this out was definitely, it was a lot of reading in terms of, I'm feeling stressed out. I'm feeling like I'm being overwhelmed. And really, people start thinking about work-life balance when it becomes a problem. When you're doing okay, you're not thinking, how do I balance my work and my play? It's usually when you have issues coming up, whether that's you feeling like you don't have enough time in your personal life to be dedicating to, your hobbies, your relationships, the people that you want to be hanging out with, or whether that's you feeling like you're constantly working or constantly worried about something, or that you're getting stressed out, or that you're not finding enough time to sleep, or that you're not finding enough time to exercise. That's when it starts to become an issue. And so really when you start to think about it, a lot of it is about kind of understanding yourself and understanding what is creating those stresses and what is creating those problems in your life. I'm not going to turn this into sort of like a self-help session, but a lot of it is sort of practical tips and tools around identifying and drilling down to those parts of your life and those parts of kind of your circumstances that are causing you these stresses, helping you figure out what's in the kind of things that you can't change bucket, things that you have to deal around, priorities that you're kind of working around, and then the things that you can change and the things that you can work around and that you can fit to fit in a little bit better with your life and where you want your life to be. Because that's a really big thing about it, is we feel like oftentimes we take on a lot of obligations, or we say yes to things, and that's what's causing a lot of these stresses, is that we feel this responsibility towards the things that we agree to. One of the tips is just don't agree to so many things, but that's easier to say than it is to put into practice. And so a lot of it is figuring out what is important and setting essentially parameters for yourself so that when something comes up, you can go through and say, is this important? Is this something that I need to do? Is this something that I'm willing to take on or that I need to take on? And what else does this impact in my life? So just going through some of kind of like the personal things that I end up juggling is, some of my priorities are, one, I need to get enough sleep. And I just am not an effective person if I don't get enough sleep. And I know that that is non-negotiable. What is negotiable, though, is that for me, my sleep schedule doesn't have to be, it actually can vary a little bit, as long as I'm getting enough sleep. And so one of the things that I've found, just observing myself and my working habits is that, there are periods where I have to sleep. Like, if I try and stay awake for this, I am not going to get anything done. And then there are periods that I can actually work really effectively. And so I find that, sometimes about once a week, I schedule big chunks of work for the middle of the night, and I'll sleep, from 9 p.m. to midnight, do a huge chunk of work, and then sleep from 6 a.m. to 10. That's 7 hours of sleep. Granted, it's not the best because you're breaking up your sleep, but for me, that ends up working. Doesn't work for everybody. Some people work much more effectively in the middle of the night. Some people work much, much more effectively really early in the morning. A lot of this is knowing yourself and kind of understanding your own sleeping patterns. And so one of the things that that you can do is kind of start observing when you're feeling sleepy, when you feel like you need to sleep, when you're feeling tired, and then fighting through that. And that part of it can be different depending on what your obligations are. So for myself, because I'm an entrepreneur, I have a lot of control over my schedule. If you're working at, if you're a student, you have very little control over your schedule. Or if you're working in a job, you oftentimes don't have control over your schedule. And so that's where you have to make those give and takes of, where is it negotiable and where is it non-negotiable? Can you, in your job, say, okay, if I come in earlier, can I find a chunk, if you just crash really, really hard after lunch and you're fighting to stay awake and you're caffeinating yourself and that's making you not able to sleep at the end of the night, can you actually take that 1 or 2 hour in the middle and say, like, this is where I'm going to go to the gym, this is where I'm going to add in some meditation or some nap, and can you work that around your job and say, I'll stay a little bit later, or I'll do some of that work at home, or I'll do some of that work a different time, or I'll come in a little bit earlier, if you can just have that hour in the middle of the day to make you kind of more effective, and so that you're not trying to fight through that and causing problems for you elsewhere in your schedule. That was a big one. It's like there'd be times where, middle of the afternoon, have to get stuff done, just not doing anything. And at one point, I just gave up and just took a nap. And rather than fighting through that for a good 2 hours, I took a half-hour nap and then was able to just wake up and just get back to work, an hour and a half later. And a lot of it is kind of breaking with the norms of doing that. And also making sure that your team understands that, no, you're not sleeping because you're lazy. It's just, you're responding to your body's needs. And, hopefully they'll see that you are a more effective person through that time. And I think people, in general, if you can communicate that to your team, it is a little bit more effective. Especially with startups, if you're starting your own company, or if you're in a small enough company, you're not beholden necessarily to the schedule that kind of the vast majority of the world adheres to. And so you can say, a lot of people say, okay, come in 9 to 5. For a startup, that doesn't necessarily make sense, and that can actually broaden if you break from that from those kinds of rigid schedules. You can actually open up the people that you can hire too. So, for example, we have a software developer who he lives in Connecticut, but he works in the middle of the night, and he also has 3 young children. And oftentimes he's working from home. And so one of the things that we were able to do with him is say, he has these really bizarre work hours. But part of that is because he's working from home with 3 kids in the house. And so he will actually take his kids to school in the morning, and then he'll come home and actually do work while the kids are at school. And then when the kids come back, he'll spend time with his family. But he also will schedule sleep in there, and then he actually finds it much better to work in the middle of the night. So the kids are asleep, his wife is also asleep. He's doing work in the middle of the night, and he works until the early hours so that he can bring his kids to school the next day and then go to sleep during the day. So he has a semi-nocturnal schedule, but it allows him to spend time with his kids. It allows him to spend time working. And he's able to do that. And what he gives up is the ability to kind of respond to work during normal work hours. And that's, for some people that's not negotiable, and for some people it is. And so for his work, the fact that we had allowed him to do that made him more effective. He told us straight up that he's just not as efficient during the day because he keeps getting interrupted by emails. He gets interrupted constantly by his family, by people around him. And so he can't do his work effectively. And so he had already figured out that if he wants to make progress, he does it in the middle of the night. What that means is that we don't expect him to work during the day. And so being able to schedule that is great for us because we're able to hire him and provide him this opportunity, and we get good work in return. And so really, if you are in a startup environment, like that is something that you have the flexibility to do, and that gives you the edge over, potentially bigger companies that are paying more money. And so for some people, they would take that pay cut in order to work the schedule that they want. Some other people manage that by working a job where the time zones are different. So some people work the equivalent of, the job in Europe or the job in Asia, but they're here, and so they have that flipped schedule, but they're responding to clients when their clients are awake. And so that does mean that your schedule can be different. And so a big part from my end is saying, the flexibility and breaking away from the traditional 9 to 5 does give you a lot of power in order to shift around your schedule. And if your job allows you to do that, that's fantastic. And if your job doesn't, and if you're evaluating a job opportunity, that can be one of the things that's on the table as a negotiating, as an item that you're negotiating for. So the flexibility in the work hours, rather than staying at work for the number of hours, it's more looking at, how are you using those hours? If you look at, some of the countries that are spending the most amount of time at work, I think Japan is infamous for it. People are spending hours and hours and hours at work, but their effectiveness is, either on par or below average compared to other nations. And so they're spending more hours, but they're getting about the same amount of time done, which means a lot of those hours they're actually just sitting there. Part of the issue is that the work culture there mandates that you have to stay until your boss leaves. You cannot leave the office until your boss leaves. And everybody feels that way. So your boss is staying until their boss leaves, and their boss. And so everybody's staying until 9, 10 p.m. They're not doing any work. They've run out of work to do. And as human beings, we physically can't do that much work. You mentally cannot be effective for that long. I mean, there are a few exceptions to that, and there are some people who are just like more effective human beings. That's rare, and trying to aspire to that, I think, is not healthy for people, and I think it builds these kind of bad habits. And so really acknowledging that, you get maybe like 5 or 6 hours of really, really effective work out of any given day, and then figuring out where to put those hours. So that's kind of one of the tactics. Also, when you're trying to figure out what's stressing you out, really just try and keep track of where you're spending your time, and look, at the end of every hour, like what I do is I set a timer at the end of every hour. I look back at that hour and say, where did I spend my time? A lot of times it's answering emails, and it's also like waiting, or it's doing tasks in between answering emails that are like short 5 to 10 minute tasks. But there's oftentimes work that you need an hour or 2 hours to do. But what I find is that, if I start doing those tasks, my email inbox is always in the corner, and it's always ticking up. And once you see an email come in, you are distracted. Like, you cannot focus on the longer task at hand until you go to check that email. It interrupts. When you get back to the task, you have to reset where you were. And so, for me, I coped with that by giving up on doing any long tasks during the day and scheduling those all in the middle of the night. Not necessarily useful for most people, especially if you have a family. That can be one of the big things that adds in a lot of non-negotiables into your schedule. And especially, if you have to sleep during the middle of the night, that's one of the issues there. And so maybe you say, you chunk in those times where you don't check your email. And most of the time, people can wait. People can wait an extra 2 hours to hear back from you. I'm sure you guys have sent emails to important people that they don't get back to you for a day or two, and you needed them to, or they don't get back to you at all. Your time is also valuable, and so the people that are asking for things from you can also wait. If they can wait 10 minutes, if they can wait 20 minutes, if they can wait until that time that you've scheduled, anybody can wait an hour. And if they can't wait an hour and it's important, that this person, like stuff coming from this person is important, give them your number so they can text you. separate those channels where you get urgent information and non-urgent information, and really just like figure out how to change that kind of signal to noise ratio. So there's a lot of technology that you can use. You know, technology is one of those things where it's caused a lot of these problems to happen because you can take your work home, because you can get emails from anywhere, in your pocket, on your wrist. They're constantly bombarding you. You have to make sure that you're using the technology and that you're not just responding to it and that it's not using you. And so one of the biggest issues that people find is that they're constantly on all the time, and they're expected to be on all the time. So they're answering emails in the middle of the night, they're answering emails at dinner, you know, you're at the bar, you're, you know, hanging out with your friends, like a work email comes in. One, you know, it's sort of like, why is someone sending you a work email at 9 p.m.? And then two, it's like, are you expected to respond to that? And if so, why do they have that expectation? Because if you're at work, you know, and this is a different conversation if you're a startup versus if you're working for someone. But if you're at work, you know, they're paying you for the hours that you're working, but they're also paying you for the hours that you're available. And oftentimes they are not paying you to be available 24/7, and they shouldn't have that expectation. And so a big part of it is not giving them that expectation. And so, you know, there are jobs where you are expected to be reachable in the middle of the night. For those jobs, they give you a pager and they pay you overtime. If you are working in a job that you are, you know, that you have these kind of stated hours, you know, if they're expecting you to be on tenterhooks all night and responding to those emails immediately, you are being underpaid for those hours. You're not being paid for those hours. You know, sending that response could take 5 minutes, but that availability and that constant checking and that expectation that you respond, that has to be rolled into it and into your calculations. And so a lot of it is about setting those healthy precedents. And that's also one of the things to watch for in a job. If you find that happening to you, or if you're evaluating an opportunity, that's one of the things that, you know, some companies will try and say, like, yes, you know, you're only expected to be in the office for this amount, but if we email you, you know, in the evening, we expect you to respond. And that's a sign for you to say that they are also paying for you to be available during those times. And so that's one of the things that you should take into your calculation of, you know, how much are they paying you? Not just the amount of hours or not just your salary, and it's not just a 40-hour work week. It's kind of that expectation as well. So yeah, so that's kind of how you separate. And then some of the other ways that you can use technology. One is I'm a huge, huge fan of snoozing emails. So I don't know if is everybody here familiar with zero inbox? It's basically a philosophy of trying to clear your email inbox so that there are no emails in it, which I got to zero inbox today. It was amazing. You know, it is one of the things that I credit with me being able to get anything done. It needs a change in the way that you relate to your email. So for me, I knew that anything in my email inbox, like I have this compulsion where if there is that little red badge on my email inbox, I have to check it and I have to make it go away. And so that's one of the things I identified for myself. And so one of the things is identifying like what drives you and what makes you kind of like determined to do things. And one of the things that was frustrating for me in my email inbox is not every email in my inbox, while you know it could have been important, it's not something that I could take action on. So it's something that I needed to do, that I needed to respond to, but for example, I needed someone else to respond to something first, or I needed something else to happen first. But I still needed that inbox or that email there. And so one of the ways you can reconfigure your email inbox is, one, by snoozing emails till later. So I can say like, this is an email I need to deal with, not right now. This will be important next week. Or this is an email about something that I'll have more information about, you know, next week. And so I set a preset kind of snooze, and it just disappears. It comes back the next week when I can actually deal with it and clear it. The next thing was figuring out figuring out how to record your tasks in your inbox. So basically the only things that are in my inbox are the things that I can do right now and the things that I need to do right now. And so that was, a really effective way, because I had this short-term defined goal. Because it was achievable for me to get my inbox to 0, I could actually prioritize those things and get there, and it wasn't several thousand emails, it was 1 or 2, which takes up a lot less mind space and means that there's a lot less hanging over you. That also means that when emails come into my inbox, I immediately sort them as, can I deal with this now? Can I deal with this later? If I deal with it later, it comes back at a time that I am ready to mentally deal with it, and I can be present in whatever I'm doing. And so that was a big thing that helped for me. It is kind of intimidating, and it requires a little bit of reconfiguring for your inbox. Essentially, you don't delete any emails. Everything gets archived. And so you can find it again later. You can always find your snoozed emails, and you can always find the emails that you've already dealt with. But your actual inbox is very empty, which is very nice. And that was one of the things where it's like, this is a compulsion that I have to get my inbox to 0, and I'm going to use that in a way where, because I have this, I'm going to schedule or arrange my life around getting to there. It doesn't capture everything, though. There are some things that don't accurately get captured there. And so the other kind of part of it is, that's more of your day-to-day task management. If you zoom out a little bit, a lot of the work-life balance and a lot of the feeling that you get that you're overwhelmed or that you don't have work-life balance is really about a misalignment of your priorities and what you think is really important. And a lot of it stems from the feeling that you're not doing something important that you should be doing. And so so I'm going to borrow something from one of my fellow mentors at Sci-City, Peter Boyd. He has this analogy of a jar. And next to the jar, you have these big rocks, you have pebbles, and you have sand. And so essentially what he likes to say is, if you take this jar and you fill it with the sand first. So the sand is all these like little tiny tasks. Oftentimes they're things that other people want you to do. They're like kind of the random things that you end up doing that aren't really critical to like who you are as a person. That you put that in the jar first. And then if you say you have all these pebbles and you put the pebbles on top of the sand, you only have, a little bit of the jar left. You can't fit those rocks in. The pebbles are the things that are like slightly more important. They're things that you know that you need to do that you would feel good doing. But the rocks are the things that are really important to you, that are kind of core to you as a human being and core to your goals in life and in your career. And so, if you put in the sand first and you put in your pebbles first, you're not left with room to put the rocks in. But what you'll find is that if you put the rocks into the jar first, you put those in, you put in all the important things, and then you pour in the pebbles, and the pebbles actually fit in the spaces around the rocks. And then you're able to fit all your pebbles in around your rocks. And then you take your sand and you put your sand in, and that actually ends up flowing around your rocks and your pebbles. And so in that way, you can actually fit everything into the jar without leaving out those rocks, which are the really critical, important things. I think you can actually see a video of someone doing this online. But it's a good analogy in the case that, you can fit the things around your life. And that way also, if you have to leave things out, the things that you're leaving out are the sand and the pebbles and not the rocks. And so it's really about like, what are the things that are important to you? And again, Peter, if you're able to take one of his workshops, he goes through a lot of how to identify those rocks. But if you kind of do a once-over of like the things that you're spending time on and the things that you want to be spending time on, there are oftentimes a couple of anchors. So, a big one is kind of your relationships, family, friends, all of that. Figuring out, are you spending enough time moving those relationships forward, giving them the time that they need, or scheduling the time to kind of develop new relationships as well. And so that's, are you giving time to your social life? Are you giving time to connect with your friends either around you or kind of outside? For example, are you scheduling time to go see your family? Are you scheduling time to go see your friends? And a lot of times, a lot of people don't do that, or that falls by the wayside, or that's lower on your priority list, and then you go years without meeting your friends in person. And that's one of the things that you end up regretting, but it's hard to schedule when you feel overwhelmed. And so a lot of it is do that first. Schedule those things in first. Reach out to your friends and say, like, let's put this time in and work around that, right? And not move that for other things. Because you're always, if you're scheduling meetings, if you're scheduling calls, if you don't have anything there already, it just fills up. It just completely fills up. People schedule time with you. But if you say, I am free, except for these days, and those days were set and they were set months in advance, it's much easier to kind of have that time. If you were scheduling a week in advance, or if you didn't do that ahead of time, that's one of the things that slips away. And because it's not, critical daily to your work, to your deadlines, it's easy for it to slip away if you don't give it the time. And that's where you end up, at the end of the year, you're like, I didn't go see my friends. And so that's kind of where you have to put that importance. And end of the year, beginning of the new year is a great time to think about those things and think about, how do you want this year to go? Where do you want to be at the end of the year? So for me, I want to have spent time with my family. My brother is, supposed to have, I'm supposed to have either a niece or a nephew in March. I'm like, I need to schedule that time to be there. And that means that I have to do it in advance. It means that I have to work around my schedule and say, this is a non-negotiable, because, there's only so much time that, I have with, with my niece or nephew when they're small. And so I want to be there for that. That's a non-negotiable for me. And so, think about the next year, think about what's coming up, and think about what do you have to give time to before all the external demands come in. That can also be, if you're looking for a job, or if you're starting your own opportunity, and say, how do I move my career forward? One of the things that can also be really difficult is, if you're not happy in your job currently, or if you feel overwhelmed, sometimes you think, okay, I would like to look for a new job. But the issue is, it's really hard to do that when you're currently working and when you're currently overwhelmed. Do you have to say, I will give myself, X amount of time? Do I need 2 weeks without my job to apply for things? Can I schedule a vacation where I just sit down and do applications for a new job? Do you have to schedule time on the weekends? You have to put that in ahead of time, or else it's going to get filled up for you. And so it's really about kind of identifying those most important things, putting those in your schedule, putting those in a place where you have to work around it, so that when you get to those times, you are sitting down and doing it, and you know that you're getting to the right places. So that's kind of another part of it, is figuring out what's important and what your priorities are. And then kind of the third piece of it, after you're figuring out your priorities for your work, for your life, whether that's career focused, your career focused, your relationship focused, and then kind of figuring out, like, what are some of the other things that give you energy, that make you kind of feel satisfied? And so for me, like, I need time to decompress, and I need time to make things. That I schedule as part of, like, my hobby time, which I need to have in order to, if I spend too much time on the computer, or if I spend too much time not making things and not creating things or doing creative activities, it takes a while to kick in, but I feel stifled. And it takes me a while to kind of figure out why. But once I find that out, it's, okay, I need to schedule in time every week to sit down and make something. And it can feel overwhelming, and it can feel like, I don't have this time, I have all these deadlines. But once you realize that, you say, okay, this is actually something that I need to do for myself, so that I can do the work later and be more effective. And so I can be happier doing the other work because I've had this creative outlet. And so a lot of it is, like, knowing yourself and knowing what gives you energy and what keeps up your energy. Sometimes, like, for example, there's the classic, if you're an extrovert, being around people gives you energy. If you're an introvert, kind of being around people drains your energy, and you need to be by yourself to recharge. And so, it can look different for different types of people. I have a friend who has to be around people in order to get energy. And so she is, an extrovert's extrovert, and so she has to schedule time because when she's at work, she's doing work in her office and she's very isolated. And so she has to schedule time to sit in the presence of other people, to go out and kind of like be out at night. She has to schedule that in because she knows that if she doesn't do that, she can't be effective at work. I'm the opposite. I have to schedule in time where that I'm by myself, kind of in my room with my own thoughts, just not doing anything in particular, but I know that I need at least 1 or 2 hours over the weekend, or at least half an hour in the night to just kind of sit, decompress, like be on my phone, not doing anything. Which a lot of times, if you are, if you're busy or if you're overwhelmed, can feel like you're wasting time and can make you feel guilty. And that's not productive. So feeling guilty is oftentimes what can cause people to feel overwhelmed. If you say, it's not that I am not doing my other work in order to sit here and just kind of veg out, reframing that as I need to veg out before I can do my other work effectively. I need to turn my brain off, let it reset, before I can turn it back on and do my work effectively. And so that's a big part, is knowing kind of where those triggers are for you, of what gives you energy, what drains your energy, and how do you move those things around in your schedule. So that's kind of like I just talked at you guys a lot. I can show you also a little bit of some of the tools that I use to kind of help prioritize and organize. I love spreadsheets. That is something that I would not say to you probably like 3 or 4 years ago. I would not be a spreadsheet person, but I have really, really come around on them. It's very strange, but I love kind of like these organizational systems, and kind of like adding those systems to my life has really helped me out in terms of compartmentalizing and making sure that these things that I have to worry about aren't hanging over me the entire day, that they happen in the time that they're supposed to happen. And I'm only worrying about the things that I need to worry about when I need to worry about them. And it's really, kind of being able to deal with the things that you can change, accept the things that you can't change, and, kind of have that mental energy to deal with anything unexpected that happens. But yeah, so actually I'd love to hear from some of you guys in terms of, one, what's brought you here, because if you feel like you have work-life balance, I feel like you're not going to end up in a session about work-life balance. And I'd love to hear more about like some of the challenges or things that you've noticed in terms of what's taking up your time or what's causing you stress in your life. Anybody want to jump in? Yep.
First, basically, I've been spending time at Science Center.
Mm-hmm.
There are residents, like Bullshit, if you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Molly.
Mm-hmm.
I've been talking to them, and I wonder like how you can find yourself as an entrepreneur, because actually. Because we all want to be entrepreneurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not everyone can be.
Yeah.
And there's like society that shows you as like you need to be perfect on this in order to be that. But at the same time, I wonder like if you're bad doing that, like a bad employee
Mm-hmm.
can be a good entrepreneur. I was thinking about that, because I really can't find myself as an employee, because it's really hard for me to like follow someone, not
Mm-hmm.
because I feel that I'm better or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. It's just my personal. And then you get doubts, because you're like, how can you expect to be a good entrepreneur one day if you are a bad employee?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point of people expecting perfection. And that's really like, again, that is one of the big core things. It's like, good enough is good enough. Like, do enough to just like, this is good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. That expectation to be perfect can be really, really damaging because you will be, one, you'll be spending, so my background, I was an art major and also background in product design. And what you find is that you spend 20% of your time doing 80% of the work. The other 80% of the time is spent getting that last 20% of being perfect. And when you have all of these things to do, oftentimes, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you have so many things to do in so many different spheres, so many hats that you have to wear, that you cannot spend your time going to 100% on any one given thing because everything else will suffer. It is a very clear-cut zero-sum game that any more time that you spend than necessary on something else takes away from something else. If you're in it, that doesn't necessarily apply for other positions or other arenas. There are a lot of places where perfection is expected, or that is part of the offering, is that it is at 100%, and you're expected to deliver something that works flawlessly. Being an entrepreneur is different, though. It has to be just good enough. And the skills that lead to being a good entrepreneur are not necessarily a complete overlap with the skills of being a good employee, right? For an entrepreneur, it is really important to have vision. And if you're working under someone else, you're kind of by necessity, you have to take on someone else's vision. And for a lot of people, that can be very uncomfortable, or that's not how they operate. A lot of it is, you try to, I would say like, give it a shot, and oftentimes it's like, have you found a good boss to work with? And have you found a good boss that can actually communicate their vision in a way that resonates with you? And does your boss give you the opportunity to execute your vision within the company? That's one avenue. The other avenue is, execute your own vision in your own way. And you'll hear this a lot, that a lot of the kind of really good entrepreneurs and people who've really made it were terrible employees. And a lot of it is because you kind of have to have this ability to think broadly and strategically. You have to have this ability or this need to kind of understand something very deeply from all angles. And being an employee, especially in a larger organization, doesn't lend itself to that because you are expected to kind of do a small part of a small thing. And so for a lot of people who are motivated by that mission and by that vision, find it really difficult to work as a small part of a large organization. That's not to say that you can't find a position working for someone else. You just have to find the right one that allows you to kind of exercise that vision and creativity. But again, that not being a good employee doesn't mean that you can't be a good entrepreneur. And a lot of the skills that you need to be an entrepreneur, a lot of it is, one, relentlessly being able to prioritize what's important. And then two, it's a focus on that strategic vision and on that customer. And there's different skills required in being an entrepreneur as well. At different stages of the company. So for example, when we started our company, all of us were just interested in kind of building something cool that would solve a problem for people. And so we were working kind of in the medical device space. We really liked just like building things and making things. And so we would build things to solve people's problems. We built these prototypes. The day-to-day work there was really fun. Nowadays, I hardly build anything at all. I barely touch hardware, which is why I actually have to schedule that time for myself in my personal time. But it's something that I don't do anymore. What I filled my time with instead is kind of more of partner building, reaching out to other companies, building relationships with customers, running a lot of operations for the company. And so that's basically figuring out strategically where do we need to be in 3 months, in a year, in 5 years, and what do we do today to get there? And that's kind of like the long-term, far-thinking vision. And then occasionally it's like, here's a really big deadline. We just need to go into like putting out fires mode, or like here's a problem that's come up with one of our devices. Like, scrap all that long-term vision, like we need to solve this problem this week. And so, but even when everybody else is doing that, in the back of my mind, I always have those long-term vision, those long-term things in mind. Solving this problem is going to improve our relationships with these customers. It's going to make our, this is going to keep us from damaging this relationship. So we need to focus on this, and this is important for our long-term goals. And so that's a lot of what it means to be an entrepreneur. And then a lot of it is, one of the biggest skills is being able to delegate. What you'll find a lot of times is like a lot of entrepreneurs don't work well with other people, and that's not where you want to be. So, also being an employee working under someone doesn't mean that you can't work with a team. It just means that you need to build the team around you that you work well with. Not all the members of a team are interchangeable. So you can't say like, I need a CTO, I need a COO, I need an engineer, and I need that. It's more of like, who are the specific people in those roles, and how do you find those people that work well with you? It's so much about interpersonal dynamics. Because you can't build a company, like a scalable company, by yourself. You have to rely on other people. And a big part of that is, how do you build that team around you so that, one, you trust them to take on the things they need to take, and also, two, how can they actually improve what you have? Their ideas are supposed to build off of your own. You're bringing in new people, new ideas, new talent, and you are relying on them to improve your product as well. So that's a big part of it.
When do you like realize when you're you create like plans or environment or habit or something? Sometimes you know that you have to be persistent to actually get the result, and sometimes you have to go back or kind of change direction, change path.
Right.
It's very hard to understand sometimes.
Yeah, and that is difficult to figure out, where it's important to say, okay, this, I believe in my vision, and this feedback is from people who don't understand that vision, and for people who aren't seeing the future that you're seeing, and that you're creating a new future, versus like, this does not have a product market fit. The people that I'm talking to are the people who are going to use it, and they're not going to use it. So it's a fine line to balance. One of the things that I just keep going back to is identify your customer and talk to them constantly. Like, find who you rely on for your company's success, and build things for them, right? Build things for those customers that either you think that they'll want or that they'll need. It's not necessarily the stuff that they say out loud that they want, but really just trying to identify what they think they'll need. But a lot of times it is taking that feedback, and it is a question of like, how much negative feedback are you getting and what kinds of feedback. And also a lot of times it's, neutral feedback is oftentimes even worse, and also just plain positive feedback, like, oh yeah, that's great. Completely unhelpful. It's completely unhelpful. Like, the negative feedback is really where you need to live to say, how do I improve my product? Because you cannot rest at where it is and say like, yeah, it's great.
Because you're really positive to do better.
Right.
That's the balance that you find.
Right. And so it's really, getting back to like, why are you an entrepreneur? Are you there to solve a problem that people have? Are you there to kind of transform the world in a direction that you think is more positive? And can you bring other people around to that vision? And so a lot of it is, if people aren't signing on to your vision, either is this vision something that people resonate with, or are you doing, can you do a better job of communicating that? And that's really, and then if you can bring in more people, you can offload some of that work, and listen to those people and take those insights.
Because I also think that being like entrepreneur, you need to. It's a lot of like I said you have a lot of like power because people are depending on you because you create your team,
right?
And you actually use them to get the achieve something or get something.
Right.
So at the same time, I think that people who want to do this need to have more consideration to people, like,
Oh,
consider
yeah.
more about that.
Right. It's being an entrepreneur is a huge responsibility. Hiring someone is a huge responsibility because you are responsible for that person's livelihood. As soon as we hired our developer, everything was more serious. It's like, okay, if we can't pay him, he can't pay his mortgage and he can't feed his family. For us, it's like we weren't paying ourselves very much. It's like, okay, we have enough in the savings, or we're able to do that. The stakes were much lower for us. But for, if you're employing people, like, that is incredibly important. You have a responsibility to them. And you never want to end up in a situation where, you find 2 weeks in advance that you can't make payroll and you have to lay off everybody the next day. And that happens, and you hear those stories, and you really do not want to be there. And that is because, one, you haven't projected out your costs and you haven't done the work to figure out what is your burn rate, what are these people, what are you paying for everybody, and how much money do you have left in the bank? And then two, it's a sort of like fundamental disrespect for the people that are working for you. And being an entrepreneur, once you hire people, is a huge responsibility. Once you have people on your team, yeah. Really quick, I'm just gonna show you guys some of the tools that I use. So this is probably overboard for what people need, but let's see. It's gonna log in. Cool. So I end up using, so a lot of people use like these kind of project management tools for their teams. I ended up just building one for myself, which, if you think about yourself as a project, can be entertaining. And it also helps me compartmentalize. So for example, this is what I built for like everything that I need to do. This is a thing called Airtable. It's basically like a hybrid between Trello and a spreadsheet. And so here it is in spreadsheet mode. And it's basically, I just built this sheet of what are all the things that I need to do.
What's it called again? I'm sorry.
So this one's called Airtable, and you can use it for free personally. But basically, I have this list of tasks of everything. And part of what causes me stress is that I'm forgetting something. And so if I can write down all the tasks that I have, I can take that stress out of my mind and say, if I feel like I'm forgetting something, I can just go to this list and look at it. And if I come up with something I need to do, I'm going to write it on this list. And so you build that habit. And then I go through, what are all the different roles that I have. And so I have one for work, I have one for the volunteering that I do with the Greater New Haven Cat Project, and then I have Center for Innovative Thinking, and then I have just like personal stuff. And then I also have like, when does this need to get done? And that's one of the things that you kind of have a little bit of control over. Some of the things, it's like I have to work off of deadlines. I am very, very deadline oriented, and if I'm working off a deadline, I will procrastinate until the deadline, and that is just a bad habit that I have. But I can either spend the time to try and change that. It's very difficult. I've tried, or I have to use that to my advantage, and I say, okay, what is the absolute last minute that I can do these things, and I'm just going to put them in there, and I don't worry about it until then, because otherwise I'm going to worry about it and still do the same thing. So I put it there when I need to do it, when I have to do it, so I don't worry about it, and I can focus on the other things that I also have to do, so I can feel a little bit less overwhelmed. And then, I kind of can start to look at what's the estimated time that this will take, and then that helps me kind of prioritize. And so if I go into, let's see, and then I can schedule this and say like, okay, so this column is all the stuff that needs to get done, kind of like first priority. This is the stuff that kind of comes after. And then there's also some things that don't really have a deadline, but that I just need to check in with once a month. And so those are the kinds of things on the right where they're there and I'm not forgetting about them, but I can think about them. And then some of the other things that you can do is like, one, you can start tracking the time on specific tasks. So I can start tracking, a specific thing that I'm looking for. And then the other thing that helps is this matrix, and you can do this for yourself in a different way. So you can say, what's the estimated time and what's the priority. And I can say, okay, so the stuff in this quadrant is things that don't take very long and that are very important. So I need to do those first. I get those out of the way, I don't have to worry about them. And then I look at things that are, okay, things that are going to take a while, but that are also very important. I'm going to schedule those, that's my middle of the night work, that's my chunk of time that I don't answer emails for, that I turn off all of my distractions and do, and you find that time, like that's what you find time for. And then you look kind of at your other priorities. So I say like, okay, this is going to be a relatively short, but it's a second priority thing. So this is something that I work on when I'm distracted by emails, mid-morning on Wednesday or something. And then the things that take a long time, but are not that important, you say, is this something that I really need to do? Or when does this get bumped from second priority to first priority? Because at some point, everything either moves to first priority or moves to not important, not getting done. And so you kind of use this as a way of like a holding area for, I don't know how important this is right now. I think it will be important later, but I don't need to worry about it right now. Or this has stayed on my list long enough that actually, it really isn't that important and I don't have to do this and I'd rather prioritize other things over this. And so having that system for yourself, again, it doesn't work for everybody, and it's really about figuring out like what are your kind of internal triggers? What are the things that like kind of set off that Pavlovian response of like, yes, I did something, or like, yes, I need to accomplish this because of this specific response that you have. And whether that's like, I need to do work with other people around me, and so you schedule that work for when you're in an office or when you're in a coffee shop. Or if you're saying, I have to do this work when I'm absolutely by myself, there's no distractions, then that's when you say, okay, I need to like bury myself in a cave to do this work. Do I do this in the middle of the night? Do I do this, like, do I remove myself from a distracting situation and go somewhere else so I can do this work? Yeah. So I think our hour is up. There may be another session after this. So I don't want to take up too much time. But does anybody have any kind of last questions? Also, if you need to reach out to me, my email is ellen@wellinks.com, WELLINKS. Let me see if I can write a note. If you need to write that down. Yes, I do have a card. I'll give you my card. Yes, feel free to email me, and also feel free to sign up for office hours. So if you go to city.yale.edu, I have office hours up there. You're welcome to sit down and schedule. And if you can't find time on that schedule, just email me, because I'm also around in New Haven. Yeah, I hope that was helpful. And if you also want to just like chat outside afterwards, happy to stay a little bit longer.
Thank you so much.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody. Hope the live stream went well.